I was halfway through repotting a tomato seedling when my phone buzzed on the porch railing, and my wife's voice came through the kitchen screen door before I could even wipe the dirt off my hands. "Walter, our daughter sent us something. You need to see this." I set the trowel down and told her I'd be right in, thinking maybe it was a save-the-date reminder, maybe a link to a registry. Instead, the first line of the email read, "Please review these requirements carefully before confirming your attendance." I actually laughed out loud, standing there in my gardening gloves, because for one full second I thought it was a joke one of her college friends had cooked up. Then I kept reading, and by the third line my wife Carol had gone very still beside me, one hand pressed flat against the counter like she needed it to stay upright. "Why would she send us a list?" Carol whispered, "like we're strangers applying for something." I did not have an answer for her that afternoon, and honestly, I still don't have a complete one tonight. Where are you watching this from tonight? Drop your city or your state down in the comments, because I read every single one of them, and it means more to me than you'd probably guess from an old man sitting in his workshop. Before I go any further, I want to say plainly that this story contains some fictional details woven in for the sake of the telling, and any resemblance to real people is coincidental, though I promise you the feelings underneath it are as real as anything I've ever known. My name is Walter Briggs. Most folks just call me Walt. I'm 66 years old, and for 35 years I kept the books straight and the payroll running for a small manufacturing outfit 2 towns over, the kind of job nobody writes songs about but somebody has to do. I retired 18 months ago, not because I wanted to, but because my eyes had started failing me on the fine print, and my supervisor was kind enough to let me go out with dignity instead of waiting for me to make a costly mistake. Carol still teases me that I retired the same week I finally learned to whistle through my missing tooth, like the universe handed me one skill right as it took away another. We live in a modest brick house on Larkspur Lane in a town called Millhaven, out in the middle of Ohio, the kind of place where the hardware store still knows your name and the diner keeps your booth open on Sundays. I built the raised garden beds myself the summer after I retired, mostly to keep my hands busy, because a man who spent 3 decades adding columns of numbers doesn't know what to do with himself once the columns stop coming. The porch step still sticks a little in humid weather. I've been meaning to plane it down since spring. Tonight, none of that seems to matter one bit. It was an ordinary Tuesday evening. Carol was finishing the dishes, humming along to something on the radio, the particular tuneless hum she does when she's content and not paying attention to the words. I was at the kitchen table with a mug of decaf going lukewarm, half reading the newspaper, when she called over her shoulder without turning around. "Walter, Melissa sent us an email." Melissa was our daughter, 29 years old, an event coordinator over in Columbus, engaged to a man named Preston Hale, and 4 weeks away from what was supposed to be the best day of her life. "What's it say?" I asked. "I don't know. It came to your account," Carol said, drying her hands on the towel hanging off the oven door. She said it was important that we read it carefully. I picked up my phone off the table. Melissa had sent it at 6:14 that evening. Subject line reading, "Wedding guidelines. Please confirm you understand." I almost smiled at the formality of it, because Melissa had always been precise in writing, even as a kid sending notes to her teachers, and it was something I had been quietly proud of for years. Then I actually started reading. The email opened with 2 paragraphs explaining that she and Preston wanted their wedding day to feel curated and cohesive for everyone attending, and that in order to protect that vision, they had prepared a short list of expectations for immediate family. She called it a list of expectations. That phrase landed wrong in my stomach immediately, but I kept scrolling. The first item said Carol and I needed to purchase attire from a specific boutique in Columbus that Preston's mother had already selected and paid a deposit toward, in colors that would be emailed separately. The second said we were not to bring our own car to the venue, and instead should arrive by the shuttle service Melissa had arranged, so that the parking area would look uncluttered in photographs. The third told me specifically not to wear my father's old pocket watch, because, and I'm quoting this directly, it might read as distracting in candid shots. The fourth said Carol's hair needed to be styled by the same stylist doing the bridal party, at our own expense, no exceptions. By item 5, we were asked to avoid any mention of small-town stories in conversation with Preston's family. because his parents came from what the email called a more corporate, cosmopolitan background, and casual references to Millhaven might create what she termed a disconnect. My coffee had gone stone cold in my hands, and I hadn't noticed. Something in my chest tightened like a bolt, turned one click too far. Not fury yet, just pressure. The kind you feel right before you finally admit something you've been avoiding for longer than you want to say out loud. I set the phone face down on the table. "Everything all right?" Carol called from the sink, still stacking the last plate in the cabinet. "Just reading," I said, which was not the truth, because I'd only made it through 5 of what turned out to be 22 items, and my hands had stopped being steady enough to hold the phone comfortably. Through the kitchen window, our neighbor's porch light clicked on right on schedule. Hank Delgado had lived next door for going on 28 years, and his timer switched that light on at 7 p.m., sharp every evening of his life, rain or shine. I'd always found it comforting, a small proof that some things in this world still ran the way they were supposed to. Tonight it just reminded me how normal this Tuesday had felt 6 minutes ago. Carol turned around, wiped her hands again, though they were already dry, and looked at my face the way a woman looks at a man after 4 decades of reading him without needing words. "Walter, what is it?" I turned the phone toward her. "Melissa sent some rules for the wedding." "Rules," she repeated, crossing the kitchen. "I've only gotten through 5, I said. "There's 22. The dish towel slipped right out of Carol's hands onto the floor, and she didn't bend down to pick it up. She just stared at the screen, and I watched the color drain out of her face, slow at first and then all at once, the way water leaves a tub when you finally pull the stopper. Carol picked the towel up eventually, folded it once, laid it over the back of my chair, and told me she needed some air. She walked out to the back porch alone, and I understood well enough after 39 years of marriage not to follow right away. I stayed at the table and kept reading. Item 6 said we should not initiate any conversation with Preston's relatives unless formally introduced first by Melissa or Preston. Item 7 instructed me specifically not to bring up my old job, phrased delicately as career small talk that might not translate well in this setting, which was Melissa's polite way of saying she didn't want anyone to know. Her father had spent his life doing payroll for a company that made replacement parts for farm equipment. Item 8 said not to tell stories from Melissa's childhood to any guests. Item 9 said not to cry visibly during the ceremony, as it might be captured on the live stream feed Preston's cousin was running. I pressed both palms flat on the kitchen table, the same oak table Carol and I bought the year Melissa turned 4, breathing slow through my nose the way the doctor had told me to when my pressure started climbing a few years back. Item 10 said no dancing without being invited onto the floor by the wedding party first. Item 11 limited us to 2 drinks each, because, in Melissa's words, she didn't want the evening derailed by loosened inhibitions. I had never once embarrassed my daughter at a family event in 66 years on this earth, and reading that line felt like a splinter working itself under my thumbnail. Item 12 said we were to refer to Preston's parents at all times as Dr. and Mrs. Hale, never by first name. Item 13 forbade any comparison between our families, spoken or implied. Item 14 said any gift for the couple needed to be reviewed and pre-approved by Melissa before the wedding. Nothing was to be handed over directly. And then Item 15 stopped my breath entirely. You will be seated at table 16 for the reception dinner. I'd been to enough weddings in my life to know exactly what that meant. Table 16, closest to the service hallway, where the waitstaff would be swinging through all night with trays, where the noise would make real conversation difficult, where nobody would be angling a camera in that direction. My own daughter had put her mother and me at the table nobody wanted. I kept reading because stopping felt like giving up on understanding something I wasn't ready to name. Items 16 through 20 covered social media restrictions, no personal photos with the couple without approval, and a required cash gift of no less than $4,000 to, in her words, properly reflect the caliber of the event, with an explicit note that handmade gifts of any kind would not be accepted. That last part hit me somewhere low and hard, because I had spent the better part of the last 2 years building things in my garage for people I loved, and my daughter had just told me, in writing, to leave whatever I made with my own 2 hands at home. The final item, 22, required Carol and me to sign an agreement that we would not post, mention, or discuss any part of the wedding publicly for 1 full year following the date. I set the phone down and went out to the porch. Carol stood at the railing with both hands wrapped around it, staring out at the yard where the motion light had clicked on and lit up the old maple tree Melissa used to climb as a girl, convinced she was the bravest kid on the block. Carol's knuckles had gone white. "I read some of it over your shoulder," she said without turning. "I saw enough. Then you know, yes." She pressed one hand flat against her chest like she was trying to hold something in place. "Walter, why would she do this to us?" Her voice cracked clean on the last word, and she pressed her lips together hard, fighting it. I didn't have an answer that made any sense of it. And I still don't. Not fully. Not even now. "Come inside," I said. "It's getting cold." She nodded and walked past me into the kitchen, and I heard it. One small sound she swallowed before it could become anything more. She went to the sink and ran the water over her hands, though there was nothing left to wash. I stood in that doorway and felt something settle into my bones, heavier than anger and colder than plain grief. I've carried a lot in 66 years. I hadn't carried anything quite shaped like that before. I was up before the alarm the next morning, sitting on the edge of the bed for 10 minutes without moving, listening to Carol breathe beside me, trying to remember the last time I'd felt that particular kind of hollow. I dressed in the dark and walked out to the garage, which smelled like it always did. Machine oil and pine shavings, and the dry warmth of wood that's been sitting a while. I pulled the cord on the overhead bulb and sat on my old stool and let the quiet settle around me. After a minute, I started talking out loud to nobody in particular, because that's apparently what a man does once he gets old enough. 35 years, I said to the empty garage. 35 years of getting up before Carol, driving to that plant before the sun was up, coming home smelling like toner and stale coffee, so Melissa could have piano lessons and dance recitals and a college fund that never once came up short. I remembered the summer she turned 11 and started riding along with me on Saturday mornings when I did small side jobs, handing me screws, asking why oak held up better than pine in a damp climate, why you sand with the grain and never against it. Good questions, real ones. And I answered every single one because a girl who asks questions like that deserves a father who takes them seriously. Those Saturdays lasted a few years, until she got to high school, and a boy named Corey Vance started coming around, and I pushed that thought away because it was too early in the morning for Corey Vance. Instead, I thought about her sophomore year of college, the Thursday night she called from her dorm, voice thin and tight, saying a fee she hadn't planned for had come due and she was $300 short with a deadline in 2 days. I told her not to worry. I called Carol into the kitchen, and we sat right there and figured out where it would come from. We'd been putting money into an account since Melissa started middle school, $25 a week whenever we could manage it, an account Carol called Melissa's cushion, not her college fund. "A college fund runs out after 4 years, Carol used to say. A cushion is supposed to last a lifetime." We covered the fee the next morning. Melissa called that night to say thank you and never once asked how we'd managed it. I hadn't expected her to. Then there were the 8 months after graduation, when she couldn't find steady work, and we quietly covered part of her rent every month without ever making her say it out loud. Because a young woman's pride is a fragile thing when the world hasn't opened up the way she'd planned. How we did right by her, I said to the pegboard full of tools. Nothing on that wall disagreed with me. What twisted in my chest wasn't anger at Melissa for writing 22 rules. Anger felt too clean, too simple for what I was actually carrying. What I felt was closer to standing at the top of a staircase in the dark and realizing a step you'd trusted your whole life wasn't where you thought it was. I sat out there until the little window near the ceiling shifted from black to gray, and I heard Carol's slippers on the kitchen floor, the cabinet where she kept the coffee filters opening and closing. I stood up to head back inside, and my hand caught the corner of an old cedar cabinet I'd built the first winter we lived on Larkspur Lane. The door swung open, and something fell off the top shelf onto the workbench with a soft, flat sound. I looked down. It was a small spiral notebook, cover worn soft at the corners, the kind of blue that's faded from years of handling. Carol's handwriting was on the front, careful, cursive she only used for things that mattered. I had never seen it before in my entire life. I picked it up gently, The way you handle something fragile before your brain has caught up to what your hands already understand. There was no title, no name, just one word written on the cover. Melissa. I sat back down on the stool. The first page had a date at the top. September 1999. Melissa would have been 2 years old. Carol's handwriting was smaller than I expected, neat and pressed firm enough to last. September 1999. Skipped the dentist cleaning this month. Said I'd go next quarter. Put the $30 toward Melissa's cushion instead. I turned the page. April 2001. Walter took an extra Saturday shift at the plant. Took the difference, $40. Added it in. He doesn't know I keep a separate count. He'd tell me not to bother. He'd be wrong. My throat closed so fast I had to press the back of my hand against my mouth. For 25 years, my wife had been sitting somewhere in this house, at that same oak table probably, writing down every dollar she'd quietly set aside for our daughter. Every appointment she skipped. Every small comfort she folded up and turned into something Melissa could use later. I turned the pages slowly. March 2004. Sold the sapphire earrings my grandmother left me. Got $90 from the pawn shop on Route 9. Added it to the cushion. Don't tell Walter. He'd feel guilty, and that's not the point. My chest felt like something had reached in and was squeezing steady, without any hurry at all. August 2008. Walter is working the night shift again this week. Made soup and ate alone at the table. It's fine. Melissa called from school and sounded happy. That's the whole point. October 2011. Sold my mother's wedding band at the shop on Route 9. $210. Told Walter I'd had it cleaned and reset. He believed me. I hate lying to him, but I couldn't watch him pick up another shift. I closed the notebook and sat there a long while with it shut on my knee. Outside the little window, the sky had gone from gray to that pale, flat color that comes right before the sun commits to the day. I opened it again eventually and turned to the last written page. Carol had drawn one line under the final entry and written below it in larger letters, like she wanted it legible decades from now. Total, 25 years, $31,400. This is not a debt. I'm not writing it down so anyone repays it. I'm writing it down so I remember I did right by my daughter, that whatever happens, I chose her over and over before she ever knew a choice was being made. If you're reading this, Walter, I'm sorry I didn't tell you. You would have tried to stop me, and I couldn't let you stop me. I didn't cry. I want to be honest about that. But my eyes burned the way eyes burn when a man is holding something too large to let out cleanly. I folded the notebook and put it in the breast pocket of my flannel shirt, right against my heart, which was doing things I couldn't put a name to. I heard the back door creak. Carol's voice came through soft. Walter, coffee's ready. You coming in? Be right there, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect. There's a particular kind of ache a man carries in his knees long after the doctors cleared him, the kind that shows up getting out of a chair or angling yourself down a flight of stairs. Mine started the previous spring. The afternoon I'd climbed up onto Melissa and Preston's garage roof to clear out a clogged gutter section myself, because the quote from a contractor had come in higher than Preston wanted to pay, and I hadn't wanted to make things harder on either of them. The new metal roofing they'd chosen was smoother underfoot than anything I'd worked on in decades, and when I shifted to reach the far corner, my right foot slid and my left knee took the whole weight of the fall against the gutter frame on the way down. I don't remember much of the actual landing, just the sky, pale October blue, and me lying in the side yard saying out loud to nobody, well, that's going to be a problem. Carol heard it from the kitchen and came running. And the sound she made when she saw me on the ground isn't one I'm going to try and describe here, because it lives somewhere in my memory I don't want to put words around. She rode with me in the ambulance and sat in that waiting room for 5 hours without eating a bite. Melissa came the next evening. She hugged me at the bedside, said she was glad I was okay, sat for 20 minutes, then said she had an event to coordinate the next morning and needed to get some sleep. I told her I was fine, because that's what I do. Carol brought this up over coffee one morning a few weeks before the wedding, the way she'd clearly been holding it back for a while. Does the knee still bother you? She asked, not looking up from her mug. Some mornings, I said. Not today, though. I'm not asking for the brave answer, Walter. I'm asking if it hurts. I looked down at my legs stretched under the table. It would hold. I'd walk without a cane, though the gait would carry a slight hitch on cold mornings for the rest of my life. The surgeon had told me as much. It hurts some days, I admitted. Today's not bad. Carol set her mug down. 20 minutes, Walter. In 4 days. That's what she gave you. I know. And Preston never came at all. Her voice caught on his name. Not a card. Not a call. Nothing. My husband fell off the roof of their house, and he couldn't be bothered to check on you once. It's her house, too, I said carefully. She picked the roofing, Carol said, eyes bright and furious now. She picked that smooth metal because it matched the trim, and she couldn't be troubled to pick up a phone afterward. I didn't argue, because she wasn't wrong. I should have hired it out properly. Preston's estimate had come back high, and I hadn't wanted to be a burden, so I climbed up there myself at 65 years old, same as I always did, filling in whatever gap got left behind and calling it nothing at all. The Thursday before Thanksgiving, I was out clearing dead branches off the hedges along the side yard when I heard Hank Delgado's gate latch click. I didn't need to look up to know it was him. 28 years of living beside a man teaches you his footsteps. Happy almost holiday, Hank said, stopping at the fence line. Same to you, I said, straightening up with one hand on my back. Got a minute, Walt? I looked at the hedge. It wasn't going anywhere. Got several. He was quiet a moment. Unusual for Hank, who generally said what he meant inside 30 seconds or not at all. I need to tell you a few things, he finally said. Been sitting on it too long already. Go ahead, I said. Corey Vance, he said, flat, like a fact he'd rehearsed. You remember him? I remember, I said. Melissa was what, 15, 16. Never liked that boy, Hank said, jaw tight. Not from the first time I caught him leaning against your fence trying to talk her into skipping school with him. You were at the plant. Carol was working her shift, and I watched it happen from my porch and told myself it wasn't my business. My stomach turned unpleasantly. I hadn't known about that particular afternoon. There were other times, Hank went on. Something about that kid always sat wrong with me. The way he talked about your work, Walt. About payroll. About numbers. He paused. He used to tell her a person whose father spent his whole career pushing paper for somebody else's factory had a choice to make, follow that road or leave it behind for something bigger. Told her if she wanted a real future, she needed to leave Millhaven behind entirely. I stood very still, hedge clippers hanging loose in my hand. She never told me any of that, I said. She wouldn't have, Hank said, because she loved you, even while she was listening to him. She was just 17 and scared, and that boy had her ear every single day telling her who she needed to become. I breathed out slow. There's something else, Hank said, looking at the side of my house rather than at me, and I understood this next part had cost him the most. About 6 weeks back, a Sunday, I was out trimming Ellen's rose bushes near the far fence. Melissa and Preston pulled into their driveway. Don't think they saw me. What'd you hear? I asked. Hank met my eyes. Melissa said, and I'm giving you her words exact because I repeated them to myself the whole walk home so I wouldn't lose them. She said, quote, my parents need their own table. I don't want them anywhere near Preston's parents. The energy's completely different. It'll be uncomfortable for everyone. And Preston said, yeah, fine. I'll sort the seating. The clippers slipped out of my hand onto the grass. He didn't push back, I said. It wasn't a question. He said, fine. Hank confirmed. His hands, I noticed, weren't entirely steady around his coffee mug. I'm sorry, Walt. Should have told you sooner. I looked down at the clippers in the grass, then out at my own roofline against the November sky. Not your fault, Hank, I said. None of it is. What are you going to do? He asked. I thought about the notebook in my breast pocket. $31,400 in careful cursive on the last page. I'm going to build something, I said. Carol found me in the garage that Saturday with a length of walnut laid across the workbench, a board I'd been saving 8 months for something worth the wait. What's it going to be? She asked, setting a coffee mug at the corner of the bench. A box, I said. For Melissa and Preston. She went quiet. The email says no handmade gifts. I know what the email says. She stood beside me and looked at the walnut a long moment. It's beautiful wood, she said finally. Tight grain, I said. It'll outlast both of us. What's going inside it? I picked up my coffee. Your notebook. The photo album from the hall closet. And a letter. Carol's breath caught. Small and sharp. Walter, my notebook is… I know what it is, I said. That's exactly why it belongs in there. She wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at the bench instead of at me, shoulders gone still the way they do when she's working through something too big to answer right away. She'll read it, she said quietly. In front of everyone. Yes, I said. She will. Another silence. Okay, Carol finally said. Just that. I spent the rest of that weekend on the joints, hand-cut dovetails at every corner, the kind of joinery that needs total focus and leaves no room for thinking about anything except the angle of the chisel and whether the fit satisfied me. By Sunday evening I'd glued it up, clamped it, fitted the lid on small brass hinges I'd had in a jar since the Clinton administration, and sanded the whole exterior through 4 grits until it felt like nothing but wood under your palm. That night I took my smallest gouge and carved the inscription by hand into the lid. Melissa and Preston. October the 11th. I lined the inside with a scrap of deep green velvet from an old jewelry box, Carol said. She had no use for anymore. Laid the notebook on the right side and the envelope of photographs on the left, and wrote 7 lines on a scrap of paper in my plainest handwriting. Melissa, I am not coming to your wedding to cause you trouble or embarrassment. I am coming because I am your father and have been for 29 years, and an email with 22 rules doesn't change that fact. Inside this box is something your mother made for you over 25 years. She never once showed it to me. I found it by accident. I think it's time you knew what it says. I folded the note on top of the notebook, closed the lid, and set the box on the corner of the bench. Carol appeared in the doorway, one hand coming up slow to cover her mouth. Oh, Walter, she said, voice breaking clean on my name. It's just a box, I told her, though my own throat had gone tight enough that I had to look at the walnut instead of her face. Before I tell you what happened at that reception hall, and what Melissa found when she lifted that lid in front of 200 guests, type box down in the comments so I know you're still with me tonight. Every single one of them means the world to me. And a small note. Some details ahead are fictionalized for the telling, and if that's not the kind of story you're looking for tonight, no hard feelings at all. You're always free to step away. Hank showed up at my back door Monday morning with his second cup of coffee and the look of a man who'd been chewing on something since sunrise. He stopped in the doorway when he saw the walnut box sitting on the table. That it? That's it. He walked over and stood in front of it the way you stand in front of something in a museum you respect too much to touch, studying the dovetails, the carved lettering, the hinges. Walt, that's a beautiful piece of work. Thank you. He pulled out a chair and sat across from the box like it was a person. Walked me through it. I poured him coffee and sat down. Carol and I drive to Columbus Friday. Receptions at a place called the Winterfield Hall. Saturday at 5. We show up when Melissa asked, sit at table 16. Don't cause a scene. Hank wrapped his hands around his mug. Somebody's carrying that box in for you. A young couple, Marcus and Renee Boone, moved in down the block last spring. Preston's worked with Marcus on some accounts they're invited. I'm asking Marcus to carry it in as our gift and set it on the gift table. Hank nodded slowly. She won't know it's from you till they open it. Not until then, I said, but by that point it'll already be in the room. Hank drank his coffee, looking at the box a long moment, then looked at me with the plain, direct gaze of a man who'd known me since before either of us had gray hair. Ellen and I want to come. I hadn't expected that. Hank, you weren't invited. Melissa didn't invite half the people who deserve to be there, he said, setting his cup down firm. I've known that girl since she was in diapers. Watched what's gone on in this family the last few years and kept my mouth shut when I shouldn't have. Done keeping it shut. Ellen feels the same. We'll sit at your table, he added. Table 16, by the kitchen. Ellen says the food's always better close to the kitchen anyway. Something loosened in my chest I hadn't realized was wound tight. You do that, I said. We're already doing it, Hank said. Ellen bought a dress Saturday. That afternoon I called Melissa. She picked up on the third ring, clipped and quick, the tone she used between tasks. Hey Dad, everything okay? Calling to let you know your mother and I will be there Saturday. We'll arrive at 4:30 like you asked. Sit at table 16 and follow the rest of the guidelines. A pause. Okay, good. Another. Longer this time. Did you and Mom get a chance to look at the boutique link I sent? We'll be dressed appropriately, I said, keeping my voice even and warm, the same tone I'd used for 35 years, managing difficult vendors whose invoices I needed paid on time. Dad, I sent a specific, we will be dressed appropriately, I said again. You don't need to worry about it. She was quiet a beat. Okay. It just matters to Preston's family that everything looks cohesive. I understand, I said. Anything else you need from us before Saturday? No. Thanks for calling, Dad. Of course. I let a second pass. Melissa. Yeah? The thing I wanted to say wasn't short and it wasn't a phone call kind of thing, and I knew it. So instead I said the only true, manageable thing I had. We'll see you Saturday. After I hung up, I sat at the table with the walnut box in front of me and thought about a girl who used to ride along on Saturday mornings, asking why grain direction mattered and what it means when something built right lasts longer than something built fast. Marcus Boone came by that evening. I explained what I needed and he listened, quiet, looking at the inscription on the lid. Then he looked up, eyes bright in a way that made him look younger than his 31 years. I'll put it exactly where it needs to go, he said. You have my word. We left Millhaven at 6 the next Friday morning, before the sun cleared the tree line. Bags packed the night before with Carol's usual quiet efficiency. I checked the tire pressure the way I always do before a long drive and stood a minute in the driveway looking at the house, gray and still in the early light. Hank's porch light still burning even at that hour, because it always was, and I found that steadying in a way I couldn't fully explain to anyone. Carol came out with both travel mugs, handed me the one with the chipped handle that's always been mine, and got in without ceremony. For the first hour on the highway, neither of us said much. Somewhere past Springfield, she finally spoke. Do you think she'll actually look at us when we walk in? My hands stayed easy on the wheel. I don't know. I keep wondering the same thing. She looked right past me at Easter dinner this year. Carol said, not bitter, just flat and factual, the way you report something you've verified too many times to argue with. Sat at that table 3 hours and talked to Preston's father about golf for 40 minutes. Asked me once if I wanted more potatoes, then turned right back to him. I reached over and put my hand over hers. She turned her palm up and held on. We reached the Winterfield Hall Saturday at 4:30 sharp, Hank and Ellen meeting us in the parking lot. Ellen in a deep plum dress, Hank in the charcoal suit he'd worn to his own daughter's graduation. The venue sat downtown, restored brick with tall windows, the kind of place that charges by the hour for elegance. Inside, white orchid arrangements crowded every table. Candles lined the centerpieces. A monogram glowed gold on a screen behind the head table. M&P, interlocked. 200 guests, easy, milling and murmuring in that particular way of well-dressed strangers not yet loud enough to be rude. And then I heard it, a laugh, quickly swallowed. I didn't turn my head. 66 years teaches you the worst thing you can do is let someone see you heard them. Carol's grip on my arm tightened by exactly 1 notch. She'd heard it too. We found table 16 along the back wall, close enough to the kitchen doors that rolling carts and stacked plates came through steady. Hank pulled out Ellen's chair. I held Carol's. 4 of us at a table built for 8, in a room full of people who'd been sorted by somebody's private calculation of their worth. Across the room, near the platform, I spotted the walnut box sitting at the end of the gift table, carved lid catching candlelight. Marcus, seated a few tables over with Renee, caught my eye and gave one small nod. The box was in the room. Whatever came next was already in motion. The ceremony ran through its motions, string quartet. The officiants practiced language about love and commitment. Preston came out first in his charcoal suit, tall, easy in his own skin the way men are when the world's gone smooth for them. Melissa came down the aisle on her father-in-law's arm, since her own father had been asked to walk in separately and take his seat early. Another line item I hadn't mentioned to Carol. She was beautiful, I'll say that honestly, and for 2 full seconds during the recessional, her eyes found table 16, found me, and then moved on like there was nothing there worth stopping for. Carol's hand went cold in mine. Dinner came and went. Champagne made its rounds. Then the MC took the microphone with practiced warmth. Before we opened the floor, Melissa and Preston have arranged something special, a family gift presentation, a tradition they wanted for tonight. Applause moved through the room. From table 16, I watched the gift table being organized, watched the server lift the walnut box and carry it up to the head table. Melissa looked at it first at close range, and I watched the exact second she understood what she was holding, jaw tightening by 1 degree. Preston looked at her, said something quiet, and whatever it was made her face go careful and flat. The MC read the card Marcus had attached. This gift comes from Walter and Carol Briggs. Polite, scattered applause. Melissa lifted the lid. On top sat my note. She read it, and I watched her shoulders change. A small drop, like something she'd been holding on to since she walked in that morning, had finally let go. She set the note down without reading it aloud, then lifted the blue notebook out, turning it over in her hands. "What is that?" Preston's mother asked from her seat, leaning in. "It's my mother's," Melissa said. Preston's father, Dr. Hale, stood from the head table with the easy authority of a man never told no at a party, and reached for the notebook. "May I?" He was already opening it before Melissa answered. He read the first date aloud without fully deciding to, the way words come out of men used to filling silence. "September 1999, he read, voice carrying easily. "Skip the dentist cleaning this month. Put $30 toward Melissa's cushion instead." The nearest table went quiet. He turned the page. April 2001. Walter took an extra Saturday shift. Took the difference, $40, added it in. "He doesn't know I keep a separate count. He'd tell me not to bother. He'd be wrong." His voice had lost its performance quality now. Gone private. Careful. A man reading something he hadn't expected to move him. He turned another page. October 2011. Sold my mother's wedding band at the shop on Route 9, $210. Told Walter I'd had it cleaned and reset. He believed me. The quiet spread outward table by table, the particular hush of 200 people deciding all at once to hold still. He reached the last page and read it slow. Total, 25 years, $31,400. This is not a debt. I'm not writing it down so anyone repays it. I'm writing it down so I remember I did right by my daughter. His chest rose and fell once. He closed the notebook and looked at Melissa, and it wasn't an angry look, just a man who'd recalculated something fundamental and found the original number entirely wrong. "Excuse me," a voice said from table 16. Hank stood up, and the room turned toward him without him needing a microphone at all. 30 years of directing road crews over engine noise had given him a voice that carried on its own. "My name's Hank Delgado. I've lived next door to Walter and Carol Briggs for 28 years, and I'd like to say something if nobody minds." Nobody minded. I watched Walter take extra shifts for years so his daughter could go to college without drowning in debt. I watched Carol sell her own mother's wedding ring to cover what he never even knew was short. I watched Walter climb onto this man's roof this past October, alone, at 65 years old, because the estimate came back too high, and he didn't want to be a burden. That fall broke something in his knee that never fully healed. He walked into this room tonight on that leg, and I watched 2 people laugh at him when he came through the door. The room turned toward Dr. Hale, the slow collective motion of people rearranging a picture in their minds. "That man at table 16 has stayed quiet a long time," Hank said, looking straight at Melissa now. "Too long. The people who benefited from that quiet ought to know what it cost him." He sat back down. Marcus stood up from his table. "My wife and I moved onto Larkspur Lane last spring," he said. "First morning after our truck pulled out, Walter Briggs knocked on our door with a bookshelf he'd built, just because he figured we might need one." He looked at Melissa. "A few weeks back, Renee saw something from our window. She saw you take a casserole Carol had driven over when Preston was sick, and empty the whole dish into the trash can at the side of your house, then rinse it out and leave it on the step. I was there," Renee said simply from beside him, "and didn't stand, and didn't need to." Melissa's composure cracked at the edges, the kind that requires active upkeep once it starts slipping. "That is completely," she started. "Did you know?" Dr. Hale's wife asked from the head table, cutting in, looking at her son. "Did you know about any of this?" Preston stood frozen, looking at the notebook still sitting on the table where his father had set it down, looking at it the way you look at something you've had your whole life, without ever really seeing it. I pushed my chair back and stood. No drama in it, just a man who'd been sitting long enough. My knee registered its usual complaint, and I let it, without answering it. The room noticed. I looked at Carol, not at Melissa, not at Preston. "Carol," I said, "let's go home." She held my eyes 1 second, then placed both palms flat on the table and stood beside me with the unhurried dignity of a woman with nothing left to prove to that room or any other. Hank and Ellen rose without a word, without a signal, simply because that's what you do after 28 years of being somebody's neighbor. I offered Carol my arm. She took it. I nodded once to Dr. Hale, not warm, not cold, one man to another. "Thank you for reading it," I said. He opened his mouth, closed it, and nodded back. We walked out, the room shifting around us the natural way a crowd shifts for movement. 40 feet to the door, my knee doing what it does, no hurrying, no slowing. Behind us, I heard Melissa's voice rise, thin and cracking, saying something to her new husband, and then the doors closed behind us, and there was only the cool October air and Carol's arm in mine. She didn't speak until we reached the car, then stopped by the passenger door and looked at me, eyes finally wet with everything she'd been holding since the laugh at the entrance, and she pressed both hands flat against my chest, right over the pocket where I'd carried her notebook for 2 weeks. "You kept it safe, Walter," she said, so quiet I had to lean in. "For 25 years, I said, covering her hands with mine. We got back to Larkspur Lane just before midnight. Hank and Ellen were already sitting on our front porch, waiting. 2 folding chairs, a thermos between them. No particular expression on either face, just 2 old people who didn't want the porch empty when we came home. Carol looked at them through the windshield and pressed her fingers over her mouth. "Oh," she said, "just that." Ellen poured chamomile tea without being asked, and the 4 of us sat out there in the cold not saying much, because the sitting together said what needed saying better than words could. They stayed past 1 in the morning. When they finally left, Ellen hugged Carol a long time without a single word, which was exactly right. In the weeks after, things settled the way. Things settle. Not clean, not free of cost, but honest. Dr. Hale called that Tuesday, said he'd read the notebook twice since Saturday, and understood now he'd been looking at all the wrong things. I told him I accepted it, and I meant it. Melissa called that Wednesday, voice quieter than I'd heard it in years, said she hadn't known about the ring, or the extra shifts, or what the fall had really done to my leg. "I should have asked," she said. "Yes," I said. "You should have." We didn't fix everything on that call, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like an actual conversation between the 2 of us, instead of the versions of ourselves we'd been presenting at each other for years. Preston never called. Corey Vance never called either, which surprised me with how much relief it brought. Marcus and Renee brought over a pot of chili that Friday, stood on the porch, didn't come in, just said they were glad we were home. The chili was excellent. By spring, the hedges along the side yard were greening back up, slow and steady the way healthy things do. One evening I went out to the garage after supper with a piece of curly maple I'd been saving since winter. Carol appeared in the doorway with her tea, right on schedule. "What are you building?" "A bookshelf," I said. "For Marcus and Renee. They mentioned needing one." She looked at the board a long moment. "That's beautiful wood." "Figured maple," I said. "Comes from how the light hits the fibers when it's cut at the right angle." She stood beside me the way she'd stood beside the walnut back in October, with the quiet appreciation of a woman who spent 4 decades watching a man love his work. "Walter," she said, "I'm glad we went." My knee was easy that evening. Cold finally lifted. The joint cooperative the way it sometimes is on a mild spring night. "Me too," I said, and set my gauge against the edge of the board, and drew the first line. "My name is Walter Briggs. I'm 66 years old. I've built things with my hands most of my life, and I'm still building them. And I have a wife who kept a secret for 25 years without telling me, and neighbors who sit on porches at midnight without being asked, and a daughter who's learning, slowly, what it costs to really look at the people standing in front of you. That's not everything. But tonight, in this garage, with this piece of maple on the bench and Carol beside me with her tea, it's enough. If you're wondering what I'd have done differently, it's this. I'd have spoken sooner. I swallowed too much and called it patience when it was really fear. Fear of being the difficult one. Fear of cracking something already broken long before I ever touched it. Don't make that mistake yourself. The people who love you quietly, who write things down in notebooks and never show you, they deserve to be seen before a room full of strangers sees them first. If this story found you tonight, maybe it found you for a reason. This wasn't a revenge story. It ended with a piece of curly maple on a workbench and a woman beside me glad we went. That's the only kind of getting even worth having, the kind that hands you your life back. If something here sat with you tonight, tell me down in the comments. Share it with somebody who needs to hear it. And stay close, because I've got more of these to tell you. Thank you for staying with me till the very end. It means more than you know.